Good evening, everybody. I want to thank everybody for showing up this evening. My name is Dan Roberts. I'm Assistant Director of Public Works over Operations, and we're going to do a few introductions real quick and get right down to business. We'll plan on staying on schedule. We have 4 speakers tonight. I want to introduce them and talk about the topics they're going to cover. What our goal is tonight is really talk about life cycle management of pastures. So we're going to begin with a session on erosion control led by Jared Tanaka with Douglas County Engineering. Then John Mergell with CSU Extension is going to talk about revegetation. Dan Nozel, I'm sorry if I butcher your name, Dan, sorry. NRC Rangeland Management Specialist is going to talk about maintaining healthy pastures. And then Dustin Polasek with Nutrient Solutions is going to talk about use of drones and management of pastures and chemical spraying. Before we get into the speakers, though, I've asked Curtis Marshall, the supervisor of our noxious weed team, to introduce his team and also introduce our noxious weed board for the county.
Hi. My team consists of Steve Anderson, who is a weed tech, Nick Wiles, who's a weed tech, Paula, the lady that greeted everyone, and myself. So welcome. Thank you. Oh, you two want to come up here?
Make him come up? Okay.
Yeah. This is Lee LePerriere and Morgan Polk.
Yeah.
The noxious weed board.
Right.
We'll jump right into the first presentation. I want to introduce Jared Tanaka. Jared is actually one of the supervisors that works for me in Public Works. Jared has been with our environmental inspections group since 2014. He currently supervises the erosion control inspectors for Douglas County. So he has a team that covers countywide, mostly construction projects, but they do a lot of other stuff too, facility management work, manage some special contracts that we have on mitigation sites. They also respond to spills and do a lot of public outreach to folks like you that maybe are dealing with a situation on your land and need some assistance to take a look at different ideas on how to deal with it. Previously, he worked for the state of Maryland as a compliance specialist for the Water Management Administration. And what I really like about Jared is he really believes in a pragmatic approach. So I know you're accustomed to seeing construction sites that have, thousands of feet of silt fence and all these different very expensive BMPs in place to help with erosion control. Jared really tries to minimize the throwaway stuff that you see on construction job sites and use things like diversion dams made, and diversion ditches just in the natural contours of the property, rock check dams, other features like that, so that we don't end up using a whole bunch of materials on a job site that we end up throwing in the trash and filling up the landfill. So with that, I will turn it over to Jared. I'm going to help him get his presentation up and running, and then turn it over to him.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'll try to mumble less than I typically do so you can hear me over the crunch of some potato chips maybe. So see how we can get this done. To echo what Dan was saying, the department, we've started to look at net environmental impact is kind of what we're after right now. Sometimes we do things with good purpose in mind, but truly what we're doing can sometimes be one step forward, 2 steps back. So in terms of being pragmatic with our approach, that is absolutely what we're trying to do. And I'll touch on that a bit later when we talk about composting and the benefits that may have, both in terms of disposal and regeneration of vegetation. So, as Dan said, our group regulates the DESC and GESC, which is drainage, erosion, sediment control, and grading, erosion, sediment control for primarily construction projects throughout the county. We regulate that they have adequate control measures in place, that we're reducing erosion, reducing downstream impacts. But with that, also, as Dan said, we are a resource. That's how we view ourselves. We're happy to come to your property, whether it be a regulated activity or not. Give you our 2 cents. We see a lot every day, hundreds of construction projects at a time when they're at their most vulnerable. That is completely denuded of vegetation with just bare soil there. So as we get started, my email address is there. Feel free to reach out to me directly with any questions about what we talked about today or your properties in general. Be happy to coordinate a time to get out to your property and see what we can do. This photo right here is one of the more extreme cases of erosion that you'll see. There's another one in here as well. Erosion happens to be one of the most beautiful landforms there is. It creates all kinds of wonderful things. Unfortunately, until it gets to that level of beauty, it's destroyed a whole lot upstream. So let's dive in. So what is water erosion? Water erosion occurs when rain or snowmelt displaces the soil on the ground. The more water flowing over the land, the more soil particles are moved or transported away. Land that has no vegetation, including farm fields that are left barren after crop harvest, are especially vulnerable to water erosion. So for all intents and purposes here in Colorado, there's 4 main types of water erosion. They are splash or raindrop erosion, sheet erosion, rill, and gully erosion. The omission there is coastal erosion, which happens all over the coast, and we're a long way from that. So we'll skip that one. Splash or raindrop erosion is what it sounds like. It is soil particles being dislodged by the force of a raindrop. It's literally every time a drop of rain lands, it hits exposed soil, it breaks apart that soil structure and transports something downstream. Obviously, over the past few months, we've seen pretty severe cases of that. And obviously, the harder it rains, to include hail, is the more of those soil particles that are being dislodged and later transported. Accumulation of the raindrop erosion creates sheet erosion, and that is the effects and combination of raindrop erosion flowing across the land, transporting dislodged soil downhill. Water is dispersed slowly and flows relatively slowly. So there's not nearly the amount of erosive power here as we're about to see, but these happen in sequence. Obviously, the rain lands, it forms a sheet, then it forms a rill. So I'm sure we've seen this from time to time. This is a fairly extreme example as well. So rill erosion is the creation of shallow channels by concentration of sheet flows. Water begins to flow in definite paths, increasing the velocity and erosive power. So as those channels are getting formed, water is moving faster down the hill because it has a more efficient path. And next, and this is the most spectacular version of gully erosion that I know of. That's the Grand Canyon, obviously. But gully erosion is soil particles transported quickly through deep and or wide channels. Mass erosion occurs as water flows freely and rapidly towards a low point. Effectively, that's water finding its level, and when you have that amount of force and energy, velocity, and volume, significant erosion can occur there, and that's what we're trying to prevent. So why do we care about erosion? Here are the issues that happen when soil erodes. Nutrients and microorganisms critical to plant vigor are displaced. Upland eroded areas' ability to sustain life is diminished. Lack of established vegetation uphill contributes to additional erosion. And excess nutrients wash downstream, creating algal blooms and dead zones. So all the good stuff that's required to maintain vegetation has made its way downhill. It's oversaturated those downhill areas with an excess of pollutants and stripping everything that's needed to grow plants from the uphill areas. It's cyclical in nature, obviously, as that topsoil and those nutrients are transported downhill, it opens it up for all of that erosion to occur and keeps happening over and over. So ounce of prevention with a pound of medicine, or whatever that saying is. So the key to all of this is preserving the vegetation where it exists. If you don't need to disturb it, if you don't need to remove it, don't. So as the slide reads, preservation of vegetation is the key to preventing migration of topsoil. The leaves or the blades of grass, they reduce the force of the raindrop erosion. So starting at the very beginning of the erosion process, it's the actual blades of grass that are protecting the soil from being dislodged at the raindrop level. Next, as those raindrops work their way to the soil, they saturate the soil, and then runoff begins to occur. The root structure of these plants, established plants, will lock that soil in place and prevent it from working its way downstream. The decomposition of leaf material of the grass itself over time, it contributes to topsoil creation. So state of Colorado, not known for their lovely, deep, dark topsoil in my experiences. So what that's doing is obviously the decomposition of that vegetation is contributing to that organic matter, which in turn is helping future generations of that species to survive. The composted material holds 20 times its weight in water. So as that water is falling to the ground, that compost that exists there naturally, as it would occur, is soaking up a significant amount of that water to prevent it from becoming sheet and later rill and later gully erosion. So overgrazing of livestock accelerates erosion by denuding all vegetation. So rotation of livestock is kind of key to that. Anywhere that they're eating down to the roots, whether it be cows, horses, anything, we are creating an erosive condition which soil will soon be leaving your property and making its way downstream. You're giving your neighbor free topsoil, essentially. So if we're unable to prevent it and it occurs, here's a few tips in terms of repairing that erosion. Timely restoration of topography and vegetation is critical. So as we're identifying those issues, the quicker that we're able to reestablish that root system, those leaves and blades of grass, the better off we're going to be for that next rain event. So instead of sitting idly by while the topsoil continues to erode, the sooner that root mass gets reestablished, the better off we're going to be. Supplementing native species with cover or nurse crops that quickly generate reduces splash and sheet erosion. So we have what's known as a permanent seed mix and temporary seed mixes and everything in between. But it's that temporary, it's that quick germination that's going to prevent maybe not the actual next rain event, but subsequent rain events from creating more and more erosion. So the quicker that we get roots in the ground, the better off we're going to be. Protects the native species, gives them some shade for the summer, and it provides some organic material to be there as those annual species die off. It also, the quick establishment of vegetation also reduces the likelihood that invasive species, noxious weeds and the like will infest your properties because we're presenting competition earlier in the game than we may otherwise. Temporary irrigation is recommended to expedite germination. It is night and day between irrigated and non-irrigated areas. So I'll frequently recommend somebody dragging a hose out there for a few weeks. It's a bit of a pain, but once we get that root mass established, once we get some germination of that, we're much better prepared for that next rain event. And as the photo would depict there, repair of small rills prevents formation of gullies. Sheet flows are far less erosive than the concentrated flows. The concentrated flows are through the rills and gullies. The sheet flow is more dispersed and less erosive. So even a small piece of equipment like this gentleman has here is very effective at preventing those rills, small rills, from becoming large gullies. So again, constant maintenance. More on erosion repair. Diversion of upstream sheet flows may facilitate seed germination. Ditches and or berms reduce run-on drainage flows and keep seed in place. Temporary measure until vegetation can get established in specific areas. So if you look here, let's see if I can do this. Here, that is the diversion right there. So as water flows from right to left on the screen, it's going to be intercepted or diverted by a structure such as that. Could be a simple ditch, gully, berm, and it would protect that in essence. So if you have, say, 100 acres right upstream flowing across this, and we get one of those gully washers, those 1.5-inch events, chances are whatever seed you just put here is going to end up down in your neighbors with all your lovely topsoil that you've already given them. So by diverting that flow around there, we're eliminating all of that run-on conditions. So that large upstream drainage area is intercepted, and now we're just getting the water that would actually land on the area that we care about there. So that's the concept there. So that would be a means of establishing probably a larger area that needs to be revegetated. So in terms of erosion repair, utilization of erosion control measures are recommended. Erosion control blanket, which I'm sure everybody's seen driving down the roadways, that's this product here underlying that. Looks kind of like a jute net, if you will. That's one product there. The benefits of that is it reduces the raindrop erosion. So as the rain is landing on that product, it's absorbing it, it's deflecting it, it's not allowing it to start the erosion process. The second product there, it also encourages seed to soil contact. So most people think that product has seed embedded in it. It does not. The first process is a seed bed preparation as you would for any other seed. Typically rake that through 1/4 inch or so, and then that product gets installed and stapled in. So that keeps the seed in contact with the soil, hopefully preventing it from washing down slopes. Next product is a sediment control log, AKA straw wattle. And that's this product here. It's properly installed in this case, so far as I can tell. That being, it's installed on a contour. As it works its way down the hill, that disperses that flow. It slows the velocity as it hits each one of those checks. It's going to slow it out. It's going to drop the sediment that's accumulated upstream. And it's going to allow, hopefully, this to grow in between these layers of controls because the velocity and the volume of water has been intercepted by that product. Next is a compost blanket, probably one of my favorite means of restoration. That's what this gentleman's doing here. He's blowing compost onto a pretty steep hillside. The benefits of that is it also reduces raindrop erosion. It retains the water, as we talked about, 20 times its weight. So that water is going to fall there and stay there. And it's going to saturate the compost and the soil underneath, and the seed will germinate. And obviously, it's going to provide nutrients for the vegetation. So it's all right there. The water's retained, the nutrients are there, and we've reduced the likelihood that it's going to work its way downhill. And check dams, in that previous example where we had a diversion around there, that's a device used to slow velocity flowing within concentrated flows. So the sheet flow versus concentrated flow, sheet is less erosive, but when we concentrate that in a ditch, in a berm, now we've concentrated that flow, we've increased that erosive ability there, so that device would counteract that and slow that velocity to reduce the erosion. So long-term maintenance recommendations from my eyes. Number one is to prevent overgrazing. Again, keep that vegetation where it's at by whatever means. If there's any ways to do that, I would strongly recommend it. Keep that root mass intact to prevent that erosion from occurring. I would also strongly recommend composting organic material to improve soil quality to be used as a top dressing for your vegetation. I'm assuming a lot of you guys have properties, larger properties with some form of livestock on it. Perfect source of compost right there. I would keep it, I would use it, I would turn it, I would keep it on the property and keep top dressing the existing vegetation to maximize the topsoil that you actually have on your property. I would recommend mowing seldomly to allow regeneration of grasses. As in allow the seed heads to form on the native vegetation, let them drop and resow themselves, if you will. A lot of the native grasses require zero maintenance whatsoever once they're firmly established. If you drive down through Larkspur, down 105, those pastures, those fields have been there for generations. There's zero maintenance performed on them. So, And then again, repair erosion, treat noxious weeds, and reestablish desired vegetation promptly to prevent more significant issues later. Treat small problems while they're small. Big problems are very expensive. It'd be quite costly to repair the Grand Canyon, I'm imagining. So. And that's about it. We can just summarize the few ideas that I had there. And again, preserve existing vegetation as much as possible. Repair evidence of erosion as soon as possible to prevent more severe forms of erosion later. Restore non-invasive vegetation promptly to reduce raindrop and sheet erosion, thereby reducing rill and gully erosion. Create, retain, and utilize topsoil and compost to prevent erosion through water absorption and vegetation establishment. So again, ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. So that's kind of the summary of it all. That's all I have to say about erosion. You guys have my contact information. I'm happy to help on you guys' properties if we can be of help. Yes, sir.
Are the compost logs expected to decompose?
The logs themselves?
Yes.
So there is a nylon fiber in there, effectively a pantyhose that gets filled with compost. And that's, for everyone's knowledge, that is a product akin to the sediment control log. One is filled with straw and wrapped in that fiber, and the other is it's blown in compost. And it can go, the benefit of that, it can go hundreds and hundreds of feet. And what I like about it is we're introducing compost. Wherever we can have compost and attempt to establish that vegetation, I'm a proponent of. Some of those products, and it depends on the manufacturer, are intended to photodegrade. So the longer they're in the sun, they break down. I'll caution you on that. I don't think they photodegrade terribly well in my experiences. They become just looks like a nylon tumbleweed over time. So essentially, I would never recommend a product that would photodegrade. It's difficult to do. They're very easy to remove. It's a razor blade down the back of it, shake it out, and then now you've got a soil amendment right there. So that's one of the benefits.
Is that the plan then, is you lay them out to stop the erosion once you have the established grasses? You have to go ahead and pick them back up?
Right.
Okay.
Again, back to my net environmental impact concept, very little is going to the landfill there. And if that's truly photodegradable, theoretically, it's going to break down there. My preference is, honestly, it gets picked up and just a small bundle of that material makes its way to the landfill, as opposed to a silt fence or a straw wattle. I mean, we've got, dumpsters full of that, so.
I have an area of construction, we laid out the blankets after it was seeded, and we have an established grass now. Will the blankets biodegrade eventually, or?
There is a bio and a photodegradable product. If it looks like all like a jute net in between, that is a biodegradable. That's the superior product. And yes, that will disappear over time. The photodegradable, again, they're tough to mow, they're tough to handle. If a mower goes over them, that's when the entire blanket can be pulled up, and then you've got a big ball of nylon-looking material. So kind of tough to handle. So. Yeah, I'll stick around for a little while. If anybody has questions, feel free to track me down. Otherwise, my email address is up there. Feel free to reach out. And thank you guys for your time. And appreciate you.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to introduce Carla Melger. Carla is the small acreage management specialist for Front Range region. She's been doing this since January of this year. Moved here from Nebraska, where she did research on manure management and soil health. She has experience working with nutrient management for livestock facilities. And Carla is going to talk about revegetation of pasture land. So I'll get your presentation pulled up for you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Carla, and I'm used to dealing a lot with small acreages and people who just bought land. And so one of the main issues that people have when I go and do site visits with them is having not enough grass, but wanting to work towards that and wanting to revegetate an area and get a more sustainable landscape, either for their cattle or just for recreation. So I'm going to focus a lot on some aspects that you can think about if you're trying to reseed an area or just trying to revegetate an area in a more sustainable way. And so I guess the most important thing to remember is that grasses are so important in Colorado. There's over 32 million acres of agricultural land in Colorado, and 71% of that is rangeland. And so that gives us an idea of the weight that grasses have for us. They're feeding us and they're feeding our cattle, and it's a big part of the ranch culture on the state. So beyond being that source of food for livestock and other domestic animals, grasses provide forage for wildlife and habitat and soil stabilization, like you were just hearing before, and there's many other benefits. So thinking about some things that you can do if you need to fix poor ground coverage with grasses. There's a couple questions that I think you should start thinking about before choosing a course of action. And so one of them would be, why is the ground bare? Is it something that is happening because of the management of the land? So overgrazing history, even if you were part of it or not, a lot of people who just bought land have to face that issue. Drought has been a big issue for the last few years, so that's going to be another thing that may or may not change. Are your soils poor in nutrients, or are they too basic and things like that? And then after you thought about some of those things, just think about, why are you unhappy with that pasture? Why are you wanting to change what you have? And so it's important to think about, if it's too weedy, then there might be some steps that you can take before reseeding and doing things like that. Is the grass too thin? Is it not performing enough? Is it not giving enough forage for your cattle? So those are things that are going to guide the course of action. Some of the land limitations that you may have that are making your soils a little poor and not giving you enough grasses could be the soil type, that it's not the most adequate for the type of grass that you have. There might not be enough precipitation, and that's changing. In general, you can have an average of how much precipitation is in your area, but that changes a lot. The climate, the altitude, the slope, the rocks, things like that can make a big difference in terms of what way to renovate your land. So it's important to, before you start, make a land assessment and make sure that you have those things identified. And so some options that you may have for a pasture that is not in their healthiest state is, either you can change some of the soils some of the factors that are affecting your soil coverage, like maybe you can change your grazing methods, or maybe you can do a little bit more of a weed management. And if that is the main issue with a pasture, you can probably reseed with the same species that you already have, if you still have them. But there's other things that you cannot change, like elevation and average temperature and things like that. So maybe consider other plants that are more suited for that area. And so we already talked a little bit about some of those factors that are limiting the type of grasses that you can grow in your land. So let's skip that. And there are some available tools that are gonna help you choose the best seeds for you. So the first thing that I like to do when someone's interested in reseeding with something different is the Soil Web Survey. So this is a tool from NRCS where you can draw your property, and it will tell you a lot of things about it, but the main thing that you're probably gonna want to know after this is what types of soils you have. And all types of grasses will have different requirements in terms of soil types and drainage and things like that. So this is a great point where you can start and have an idea of what you're working with. And if you get very deep into it, you can find out like the natural vegetation that grows in your area, for example, and things like that. It's called ecological regions. So you're gonna find like that composition of grasses that naturally occur in there. But you don't have to get that deep into it. You can just figure out what soil type you have and what grasses need.
Where do you find that site?
It's called Soil Web Survey, so you can just Google it and it's gonna pull up. So yeah, I think I put a link at the end of the presentation for it. So some of the keys, if you already decided that what you need to do is to seed something different, will be to choose a seed that adapts to your wants and needs. So if you're feeding cattle, you're going to want a higher producing grass, and some of the limitations that you may have. So you need to start, I feel like, by controlling the weeds in your property before either considering that your grasses are gonna recuperate from years of overgrazing and things like that, or if you're wanting to do a whole reseeding project, weed control is gonna be key for that. And then the seed choice, the seeding date, the seed quality, and the seed bed preparation, seeding placement are all things that are gonna play a big role into making that reseeding more successful. So first thing, weed management and identifying weeds is probably the most important part, and you may not need to know exactly the scientific name of each weed, but there are some things that you're gonna want to know so that you can make a better use of your time and your money. So if you are able to identify whether a weed is annual or not, that's gonna be a very important first step. You don't wanna be spraying weeds when they're already past that seeding production stage, not annual weeds at least, because you're already, those weeds are already about to die, pretty much. And then creeping perennials are gonna require different management. And then if you have annual grasses, that's gonna make that whole weed management process a lot harder, because you might not find the herbicides that work better for those. And then seed choice, there's a typo there. Seed choice, it's important. You need to know what seeds grow in your area. So again, look at your soil type, look at your climate, your elevation, and choose plants that are better adapted for that. And then after you find out what grass type you need for your area, make sure that you get good seed quality. So you can buy probably a cheap seed mix that is not gonna fulfill some of those standards that I put in there. So you're gonna want a good germination, purity. You're gonna want a seed mix that doesn't have that many other seeds from crops or weeds in it. And you wanna make sure that those seeds have been tested within the last 9 months, so that you can make sure that this company is actually selling you a good product. Seeding date is gonna play a big role too, and you're basically gonna have 2 time frames during the year when you can do that. And so after you've already controlled the weeds in your property, then you can have this option of choosing whether you're gonna do a dormant seeding or a spring seeding. So a dormant seeding is usually done in the fall, and it's usually after the temperatures have cooled down enough that your seeds are not gonna start germinating in the early days of the winter, because that would probably kill some of your grasses. And then you can also choose a spring seeding, which is whenever temperatures have warmed up enough that the grasses can take advantage of some of that moisture from the snow melt and things like that. So then seed placement is also very important, and it's something that, depending on what type of equipment you may or may not control, seeding or placing the seeds too deep into the soil will cause your seeds to use a lot more energy just trying to emerge out of the soil and not producing enough of the leaves that are actually feeding the plant. The ideal depth for a seeding is between 1.5 and 2.5 inches. And then if you do it too shallow, then you're exposing some of the roots, and that's gonna be a little bit harder to establish, because you're gonna have that incidence of erosion or wind or animals trying to rip your seeds off of the ground. And so a lot of that seed placement is gonna depend on your seeding equipment. So some of the most common options are the ones you're seeing there on the screen. So broadcast seeding is usually pretty easy, pretty cheap. You can do it, but you're gonna want to use double or triple the seeding rate, because you have to assume that you are going to lose some of those seeds because of what I said before. Your seed might be a little too shallow in the soil. And then what you want to do for that is till before you place your seeds, and then drag or pack the soil after you place them, so you can make sure that you have a good seed to soil contact, but also protect them a little bit from the environment. A cultipacker is also a pretty good tool to use. You're probably also going to need to till your seed bed, and that's going to allow the seeds to stay in the soil a little better. Cultipacker would do a little bit better in terms of providing that soil to seed contact, but you're still going to want to drag or pack after seeding. And then you can also find drill seeders, which can help you directly plant the seeds into the soil. And you're also going to need to till the seed bed, and you need to use a drill that's specifically made for grass seeds. So if you use a grain drill, you're probably putting those seeds too deep into the soil. So just one thing to keep in mind. And usually, no-till drill seeder is pretty successful for grasses. It allows you to seed on top of existing vegetation. It reduces erosion, so it gives you a little bit more of that organic matter that stays on the soil after you place the crop, or if you decided to mow your weeds and things like that, they're going to stay in there and they're going to hold some of your seeds. So again, after you've identified what tools you have for reseeding, do some seedbed preparation. If the land is irrigated, you're gonna want to make sure that even if the ground is not, if it's not possible to get your ground level, then maybe you can work around that and make sure that you're using the right seeding rates for that area that's a little bit down the slope, because that might introduce a little bit more of a challenge. There's going to be some weeds that are going to perform better in those areas down the slope. Again, going back to that, weed management hasn't existed, seed bank be depleted. So after you control all weeds, there's going to be some seeds in the soil that are still viable, so you want to make sure that most of them have germinated and you kill them on time. And then crop residue on the top of the soil is a good thing to have. It prevents erosion. It keeps that soil in the soil. But you can actually have too much to the point that your seedlings are not seeing the sunlight. So that's one thing that you can also manage. And then fertilization, either if you have an established pasture or you're trying to reseed an area, you need to base it on a soil test only and not just fertilize because you think that's gonna help your plants, because often, especially in dry land, that's gonna benefit your weeds first. So you're just feeding your weeds before you're feeding your grasses. Nitrogen is one thing that you only want to do after plant establishment, again, because if you're putting nitrogen in the soil without needing it, then you're just feeding your weeds. And so the addition of nitrogen is not recommended on partial renovation because of the same reason. And then phosphorus and potassium is going to be probably the one thing that you may or may not need to add. They're not very mobile in the soil, so you probably want to incorporate it or use it when the plants are being established so that they can grow. These two elements help plant roots develop a little better, so that might be a thing that you would have to add. And then if you graze your pastures, or even if you try to mow your pastures, big question often is how long before I can graze? And the answer for that is, if you're establishing a pasture, wait till the roots are established. In dry land, it takes about 3 to 5 years. It may be less if you have very good rain that year, but it's usually between 3 to 5 years that you cannot count on that field for grazing. And then in general, I guess, if you already have an established pasture or if you're trying to establish it, you have to wait until the grass is about 6 to 8 inches, depending on the type of grass that you have, and then remove animals or stop mowing when it's half of its height. So the main takeaways after this, I think, would be if you have an established pasture that you're trying to make healthier and make it more thick, then changing management, it's probably a good renovation technique before having to reseed the whole field. So sometimes changing that grazing management and doing rotational grazing can do a lot more than just trying to recover everything and reseed everything. And then if you are trying to establish a new pasture, just make sure that you study your land first and know what your limitations are in terms of temperature and soil type, weather, frost period, and things like that. So make sure that you know your land first so that you know what you're putting into and that it's going to succeed. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'm here. And here's a few resources that you can access. We have a newsletter. There's a website for small acreage management, and you can download the Colorado Forage Guide. If you're not familiar with it, it has a lot of those grass species that are commonly grown for feeding animals, and it will give you a good guidance on what to choose. So, thank you.
So Steve has a mic, and we're going to ask, if you use the mic, Steve, there's a question up here.
Yeah.
Because we're recording this, so you'll have access to it afterwards. And our tech person said if you don't talk in the mic, we can't hear your question. I guess his question was he just wanted to look at the other slide. So.
For someone who's starting out, what's a good tool for tilling?
Oh, that's a good question. John.
Be a small disc, or?
I would recommend something that can do a little bit of a more shallow tillage. I'm trying to think.
How big of property are you doing?
Was
What
that?
size property are you doing?
What's
Oh,
that?
What size property?
Oh, I'm talking about, I'm thinking about the small horse owner. I have 200 acres, so I
Yeah.
have equipment. But someone who has small acreage and they're just getting started, they don't want to go out and buy a rototiller.
Right.
That run the back of their tractor. So, I'm thinking like a
Yeah.
6-foot disc maybe, or something like that would be affordable.
yeah, or it's something that does very shallow tillage. Sometimes, if that's not something that people want to go out and buy, probably just dragging a chain or something like that would do enough to disturb the soil on the top and have, like, breaking down a little bit of that soil surface. So it depends on what's available, I guess.
I was thinking trying to get it 2 inches deep, though, you're gonna have to break it up pretty good.
Yeah, that's true.
Any other questions?
There.
I have a field that hasn't been grazed for decades, but it's depleted and thin because of long-standing drought and then the rains taking all the organic matter away. So I'm thinking of fall cover crop and then seeding in the spring. Do you have thoughts or experience with that?
Are you planning on just putting that cover crop on top of what you already have, or just changing it all up?
Seed drill.
Okay.
No, it would not be removing what's there. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it can be tough because of a lot of the cover crops may need a little bit more irrigation than what you may have. I don't know what area you're at, but some of the cover crops may need a little bit more water than your native grasses, so that can be an issue, but it's not impossible. I've seen winter or cereal rye that grows pretty well on dry land. So that should be good enough for you to get some of those nutrients back into the soil and break down some of that soil surface, and then you can go in with a different or the same type of grass on top of that residue after that cover crop.
A point I want to make is that if you go to the Pawnee Buttes Seed website, they have amazing information on the different grasses and mixes and growing conditions.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good, I like their website a lot. They are specific in terms of what precipitation you may need for type of seed and things like that. So that's definitely a good place to check if you're looking for options.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So we actually have a pilot project we're doing some restoration on this fall, and it's bare ground, and we're doing a cover crop. We're doing a rye, and then we're going to just roll it because they'll break right off, and you can even crimp it in, just like you would do a mulch, and then we'll plant seed in the spring. But it's a low area, so obviously after this year's moisture that we've had, it's got a lot of moisture in the ground right now, and probably will continue to get a lot of moisture. So
So you say roll it, what's that?
just going to roll it with a roller, and it'll break off. The gentleman that's doing the work for us said it'll snap off like an inch above the ground once it's dry in the spring, and it'll be just like mulch when they seed on it. So we'll see. It's a pilot for us. We haven't done this before, so we'll see how the technique works and maybe report back to everybody next year on how well it does.
What kind of rye?
I think it's just a winter rye. I don't know the exact seed blend that we're putting down, but pretty interested to see how this works. I'm a road engineer, and when we build road projects, we get to bare dirt, and then we don't do a good job restoring. So, eventually that impacts private property owners because it gets weeds in it. And so, our goal is to figure out a better way to do restoration along our roadside projects in the future. Okay, our next speaker is Dan Nozel. Dan is the Natural Resources Conservation Service Rangeland Management Specialist. He obtained his bachelor's degree and master's degree in rangeland management from the University of Nebraska. Dan worked on a ranch in Nebraska Sandhills for 4 years while obtaining his master's degree. He began working with NRCS in Kansas in 1983 and transferred to Douglas County in 1990. So obviously a wealth of information in Douglas County. So I want to welcome Dan. Let me get your presentation teed up for you.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, you bet. This is a great turnout, guys. Heather and Curtis, you did a great, or whoever did the advertising, you did great. I didn't expect to see this many people there, and I'm not used to talking in such a fancy room either. Usually it's in a barn somewhere, But I brought a handout, and okay. Do we have a pointer?
There is a laser pointer. Let's see. That one right there.
That one? Okay, cool. All right. That's what I need. So I've got about 30 copies of this. So if you came as a group, couple, whatever, if you could maybe just take one and pass it down, appreciate it.
Dan, if you want to walk around, we can give you another mic.
Do we have one?
Yep, we do.
Yeah. I do walk around. I don't
Okay,
like to
we'll
be
give you a mic
contained.
then.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, sir. Okay. Is that on?
Yeah.
It is? Okay, cool. So, yeah, my name is Dan Nossel. I'm with the Natural Resources Conservation Service office in Franktown. I'm a rangeland management specialist. And so how many folks have grazing land that is less than 160 acres? Okay. How many have grazing land more than 160 acres? So you got the 200, right? Anybody else? So mostly small acreage, right? You got, okay, back there we got Okay. So yeah, we got a couple folks that are larger acreages, but mostly small acreage folks. So what I'm going to be visiting with you about today is primarily grazing land and how to properly take care of it through pasture management with grazing animals, okay? And we've had folks talking about how to rehabilitate land that may have been overgrazed, looks pretty bad. And so if you're in that situation, then yeah, take their advice. I'm talking about how to not get to that situation, basically, okay? All right. So, before we arrived, there were migratory grazing animals all over here. You know, it could have been bison, primarily bison, but there were large herds of elk, antelope, deer also. There was a relatively small human population prior to European settlement is what I'm talking about. No fences. Mother Nature pretty much ruled. You had prey-predator relationships, and so things were, you know, survival of the fittest, essentially. Plants and animals had to adapt to the environment. We think we had pretty good to excellent rangeland condition under that type of a grazing regime. Lewis and Clark expedition writings and that sort of thing gave us some idea of what we had. So what was their grazing system? And of course the bison, thousands of animals coming through an area at a time, migrating through, very short graze periods. When they were moving along, and they had to stay in herds because they were being chased by packs of wolves and other predators. So they stayed in a tight herd to help protect themselves. And as they were moving across the prairie, they pretty much decimated it. I mean, eating everything underfoot, eating themselves out of house and home. And so they had to continue to migrate to new pasture. And so we think that their grazing periods were probably not more than a day or two in any one area. And then they migrated to another area and probably didn't come back to that area for maybe a year or two. Okay, so very short graze periods, very long recovery periods, and our rangelands evolved under that type of a grazing regime. Well, what happened then? A European settlement, the prairie was fenced, individual ownership. Native Americans didn't have that concept of individual ownership, but the Europeans did, okay? So subdividing and, you know, this is my piece and, you know, I'm gonna fence it off and that kind of thing. Kind of a lack of awareness of fragile resources and or the ecological processes. You know, probably didn't consult the Native Americans very much on ecological processes and that sort of thing. You know, they just kind of did their own thing. Not familiar with proper grazing practices, perhaps, and had improper stocking rates, you know, fenced out their 160 acres and put animals on it year-round, and maybe too many animals. You know, a lot of places in Europe had different climate and different vegetation and that sort of thing, and particularly in our areas out west. In our area here, semi-arid climate, okay? And continuous grazing, like I mentioned, grazing year-round or even season-long. So the result, in a lot of cases, and this picture was taken just west of town here, you've got, you know, you got a lot of bare ground there. And this is a horse property, probably 5 acres or so. But about all that's left in there is some yucca, you know, some scrub oak that's kind of been rubbed on and stuff, but a lot of bare ground, right? That's just another picture of that same property. And this is up by Greeley, again, a horse property. It looks green, which is good, but there's probably a lot of weedy stuff in there too. And it doesn't matter what animal it is, horses, cattle, goats, sheep, any grazing animal, if they're doing continuous grazing, it's going to probably end up looking like that. And these goats even took the yucca there. This is a property by Parker. It's kind of hard to see because it's a little bit dark, but this is a hillside here that, again, this was a goat property. Continuous grazing. There's a lot of erosion taking place on that hillside from the bare ground. And so you can see it silting in the bottom of the hill there. Not big gullies, but a lot of rills, okay? And so, you know, the old adage, you lose the soil, you lose the farm. Well, that's kind of the way it is, because it takes thousands of years to rebuild topsoil. Now, we can help it along by doing some of the things that those guys mentioned before, composting and that sort of thing, but if you leave it to its own devices, it takes that long to rebuild topsoil. So we want to protect it, right? Consequences of overgrazing: decreased native vegetation, increased undesirable plants, bare ground, erosion, loss of topsoil, air and water pollution from the erosion, land devaluation. I mean, you know, who wants to purchase a property that's, you know, looks like that, right? Not aesthetically pleasing, and also the loss of wildlife habitat. I mean, you know, wildlife kind of need cover and habitat and that sort of thing. So, not good consequences. So, we need to find a solution to the problem. Just like this elk found a solution to his itch, right? So we need to find a solution to our problem. So we can start by talking about rangeland productivity. How much are we producing out there so that they can graze? This is limited by our climate in particular, precipitation, what falls out of the sky. And again, we're in a semi-arid climate, so it's not like Kentucky or Iowa or some of those kind of places, all right? Soil type, somebody mentioned, I think Carla maybe, on the Web Soil Survey. You can go to Web Soil Survey and you can draw around your own property, determine what soils are there. Typically, our sandier soils actually are higher production than our clay soils are. Clay soils tend to, you would think that they hold the moisture really good. Well, they do. They hold it so good that they don't let the plants have it. Those clay particles hold the water really tightly. And so, anyway, so soil type has a little bit into it. Topography, steeper ground generally doesn't produce as good as bottom ground, right? Or leveler ground. The vegetative species that are present. Short grasses versus mid grasses versus tall grasses. And the management that's happened on the place, past and present. So all of those things factor into range productivity. We use these terms to determine range condition. Excellent, good, fair, and poor. We can describe excellent as 76 to 100% of the vegetation that's out there is a mixture of desirable native plants. That's good. I don't see it very often, unfortunately. You know, most of what I see is actually in this fair category, some in the good category, some in the poor category. But yeah, 51 to 75% desirable for good, 26 to 50 is fair, 0 to 25 is poor for desirable plants, and mostly invader plants. Weeds, right? No. Okay, this is kind of it looks scattered up there, right? It's a cartoon depiction of how plants make food for growth, and so it looks kind of busy. There's a lot going on here, and it's an old publication from the 1960s
that our agency had put together. And I've got some copies of it that you guys can grab on your way out if you'd like. But basically we've got, and I like it though because it kind of really depicts what's going on. So you got the sun up here, right? And you got the rain cloud over here raining down, and you have some oxygen in the air and that sort of thing. But you also have some carbon dioxide in the air. And so this food factory here, it takes the sunlight energy through the process of photosynthesis, if you remember in your biology class. And in the green growing leaves of that plant is called chlorophyll. And so through the process of photosynthesis, it uses that sunlight energy, mixes in water and minerals that it gets from the roots. Okay, these little guys down here, they're mining the water and the minerals from the soil. They're taking it up to that food factory in the leaves of the plant, right? And so you're mixing that water, minerals, carbon dioxide from the air, and then using the sunlight energy to create food for that plant. So plants make their own food. A lot of people think that, well, they get their food from the roots. They don't get their food from the roots. They make their own food, okay? And so they get the water and the minerals from the roots, but they make their own food. And they need green growing leaves to do that, okay? And so that's the whole process of photosynthesis, and all these guys are doing their job. And so once that food is made, then it goes down back through the roots or through the plant, and you see this guy's bagging it up in the food storage area in the roots. So it's making the food, storing it in the roots, okay? That's the process. Well, that's great. But you got this Hereford bull standing out here in the pasture, and he's hungry, and he's going to eat that plant. And he took some of it here, right? Well, okay, takes half that plant, completely natural. That's the way our rangelands evolved, with grazing animals, okay? And so that plant is somewhat traumatized, though. Its food factory's gone. It has to start rebuilding some leaves by using its food storage, the carbohydrates and some proteins and fats that it's stored in its roots to start growing new leaves. So it just starts to grow new leaves. If that bull's still out in that pasture, what do you think he's going to do? He's going to go back to that new growth on that young tender plant and regraze it, right? So how long does it take for that regrowth to happen, before he gets a hold of it again? Well, it varies depending on where you're at and on the time of year. Where you're at in the country, I mean, in terms of how fast regrowth happens. But we'll talk more about that later. Anyway, so that's the process of how plants make food for growth. We also talk about carrying capacity as a part of a whole pasture management. And the carrying capacity is defined as the number of animals that a parcel of land can support without overgrazing. And this is a function of the type and size of animal. Big animal, 1,200 pounds, going to eat more than a small animal, 100 pounds, right? The number of animals, of course, is range condition, whether you're in an excellent category or poor category. So the productivity, basically. Ecological sites. This is correlated to our soils. Again, sandier soils generally produce more than clay soils do. The total production, it's variable depending on past use and climate, again, where you're at in the country. And then, of course, the number of acres that you have. How big of an area are you going to be grazing? So all that is a function, the carrying capacity is a function of all of those things. In our area, on average, it takes about 30 acres to carry one animal unit That's a 1,000-pound animal, okay? One animal unit is one 1,000-pound animal. It takes 30 acres to carry that animal for 1 year without supplementation and to still maintain proper grazing use, on average, okay? It can vary a little bit depending on, you know, your production and that sort of thing. Forage availability. So how do we determine forage availability then? How much forage we have available to graze? We can do a range inventory and a clipping. This is where we go out to the field. It's rather time consuming. It requires training and estimating species composition and that sort of thing. We can use the NRCS technical guide. It has some average estimates based on the ecological site that you're on, that you can find from Web Soil Survey. You can determine what ecological site you're on. Our forage availability, we use animal unit months as our forage measurement, essentially. And an animal unit month is the amount of forage necessary to carry one animal unit for 1 month. It's about 912 pounds of air-dry forage. That's how much it takes to carry one animal unit for 1 month, is about 912 pounds. A 1,000-pound animal will consume about 3% of its body weight per day, which is about 30 pounds. 30 times 30.4 days in a month is 912 pounds. So that's what an animal unit month is.
Did you just say air-dried forage?
Air-dry forage.
Hay?
Hay. Yep. So if you're going out and you're cutting, you know, wet forage out in your pasture and you're measuring 912 pounds of wet forage, well, you have to wait till it dries out and actually get the, you know, the dry weight of that to determine, you know, the correct value, essentially. So actual wet vegetation out in the pasture, they're consuming more than 912 pounds of that because it contains, on average, probably about 30 to 40% water, you know, so.
So you are counting the grass too, along with the hay, it's just wet as opposed to dry.
That's correct, yeah. So if you're feeding hay, then you can use that as a, you know, I guess to replace your pasture, essentially, for that one animal unit, yeah. These are some kids at Camp Rocky doing the range clipping. They got a clipping frame right there. So we use a 9.6 square foot frame. We clip everything out of there. We measure that in grams. We determine the air dry weight of it so that we get air dry. And then we multiply that grams times 10, and that gives us pounds per acre. So it's quite a process. Like I said, doing the clipping and that sort of thing is rather time consuming to determine, you know, forage availability. NRCS technical guide have estimates on stocking rates. So for different ecological sites here, over to the far right, in excellent, good, fair, and poor condition rangeland, you can get the animal unit months per acre figure. So it kind of gives you an idea, right, of how many animal unit months that are being produced on that ecological site in that range condition, okay? And then you multiply it times the number of acres, and that gives you total animal unit months then. But I came up with a simpler approach, and that's what I handed out to you folks. I call it the Rangeland Management Guide Sheet, a one-page introduction to range management. Includes a worksheet on the back that you can use to customize to your own acreage, okay? So on that sheet, it shows on the front side that these are the average AUM per acre figures for each range condition class in Douglas and Elbert counties. So poor condition rangeland, about 0.3 AUMs per acre. Fair condition, 0.4, good 0.5, excellent 0.6. If you really don't know, just use an average of 0.45. You know, you'll come pretty close. in most of our situations. So I'm going to run through an example here. Let's say you have average condition pasture, 0.45 AUMs per acre. You have 2 horses. Each horse is weighing about, and if it's an average size quarter horse, about 1,250 pounds or so. So that 1,250 pound animal is equivalent to 1.25 animal units. A 1,000 pound animal is 1 animal unit. But this is bigger than 1,000 pounds. So every 100 pounds of animal is about 0.1 animal units. So that's why we have to give him 1.25 for each horse, okay? So you multiply that times 2, that's 2.5 total animal units. You have 5 acres at 0.45 AUMs per acre. That's 2.25 animal unit months of forage that you're producing. So that's the supply. This is the demand. So you take the supply divided by the demand, and you get 0.9 months of grazing per year. Those 2 horses can graze on that 5 acres for about a month a year, okay? And maintain proper grazing use. So that's about 27 days a year, 12 hours a week, about 2 hours a day. If you let those animals, if you ration them out, let them have 2 hours a day, and be pretty diligent about it, then you're within what we call carrying capacity. You're not grazing more than what's available there, okay?
So that doesn't take into account hay, so hay would be supplemental.
Oh, well, this is saying you've got about a month of forage available in your pasture, which means the other 11 months of the year, you got to supply hay. So essentially, if you're going to be putting them out there for 2 hours every day throughout the entire year, they're on full feed, right? They're on full feed. They're out there for that 2 hours just recreating, you know, running around, having a little fun, maybe grazing a little bit, and they will graze. I mean, you know, they figure this stuff out pretty quick. Hey, I'm getting let out for 2 hours. I'm going to get all the forage I can in that 2 hours, right? So, yeah. So why does rangeland decline with continuous grazing? Because those animals selectively graze. Just like we talked about that bull, he's going to go back to that plant that he liked, and he's going to graze it again, if he's still out in the pasture. So desirable plants get overgrazed. Undesirable plants are not grazed. They don't like them. They're doing just fine. The undesirable plants are staying healthy. The desirable plants, not so much. And then you get a shift in species composition. Those desirable plants, if they don't store enough food and they go into the winter with the inadequate food reserves, they'll winter kill. And so over time, you got your most desirable plants winter killing, and then you have the undesirable plants filling that gap in there of where the desirable plant was, and that's why you get this shift in this species composition because of that. So we like to encourage rotation grazing systems, okay? Instead of putting your animals every day, we'll use that same example, putting them out there every day for 2 hours on that 5 acres, subdivide that 5 acres into smaller pastures, let them have their 2 hours every day for a couple of weeks in pasture number 1, and then, you know, a couple of hours every day in pasture 2 and 3 and 4, and rotate them through. So that once that pasture number 1 is done with its grazing period, it has an opportunity to recover. Those leaves are able to get up there and do their food factory thing and store food in their roots, remain healthy. They're able to compete better then with the undesirable plants, okay? So that's how we keep those most desirable plants healthy. You have to give them a recovery period. So our rotation defined as a practice in which 2 or more pastures are alternately rested and grazed in a planned sequence for a period of years. If rotation grazing is not practiced, then range condition may not improve, and may even continue to decline even with proper carrying capacity. So even though our 2 hours per day is within our carrying capacity. If you're turning them out there every day for 2 hours, they're going to go back to those, these animals aren't dumb. They go back, they know where those best plants are. They go back to them within that 2-hour period of time, and they regraze those plants. So they're getting grazed and regrazed every day, even though they're only out there for 2 hours. So you have to do the rotation grazing and give these, you have to have a period of grazing and then a recovery period. The recovery period is really important. Essential concept, so here it is, recovery, amount of time allowed for plants to regrow and restore energy reserves after being grazed. Throughout most of the growing season in our semi-arid climate, 90 days of recovery is required after each grazing event. So what I try to encourage folks to do, try to get to 10 separate pastures. You don't have to have permanent pastures. You can use temporary electric fencing. Works just fine. Animals respect it. And if they're only going out there for 2 hours a day, heck, you don't even need water for them out there. They'll do fine without water. So just, you fence off that 1 acre area. Well, actually, if you're going to have 10 pastures on 5 acres, you'd want a half-acre area, right? And for 10 days, put them out there for 2 hours for their consecutive 10 days, then go to pasture number 2, do the same thing, all the way through 10. When they come back to 1 again, it'll have 90 days of recovery. So you need 10 pastures in order to do that. Why do I say 10 days? Because probably in that grazing period, plants will not regrow enough where they can be grazed again. Not in our climate anyway. Maybe in Kentucky where things grow back really quickly, but within a 10-day period of time, they're probably not gonna, that plant, if being grazed on the first day, probably isn't gonna regrow enough where they're gonna get a hold of it again. So theoretically, we want each plant to be grazed only 1 time in a grazing period. It gets its 1 graze, and it's completely natural for it to do that. That's the way it evolved with the grazing animals. Gets grazed, but then it has a long recovery period where it's able to recover and remain healthy. Okay? So here's an example of this. We have 1 pasture, 1 herd, no recovery time, continuous grazing. Now we have 2 pastures, but we put animals in both pastures. No good. Still no recovery time. Okay, so you need to put the animals together and move them as 1 group. So you got 2 pastures. Now you got 50% recovery time in each pasture. If you subdivide that even more into 8 pastures, did I skip one? Yeah, 4 pastures, we got 75% recovery time. 8 pastures, 88% recovery time. 16 pastures, 94% recovery time. You get the idea. Essentially, the more pastures you have, the shorter your grazing periods, the longer your recovery periods, which is good. So there's a rotation. This pasture's rotated. This one's continuously grazed. Kind of a fence line contrast there. Successful grazing systems, they simulate the migratory bison grazing. Proper carrying capacity, control the length of the grazing period. I know I'm running long here, sorry. Prevent livestock from grazing each plant more than once, like I said, during a grazing period. So that's why 10 days or less is preferred. Provides sufficient recovery period depending on growth rate. Our fast growth period, end of April through May, maybe the first part of June, things are growing faster. Maybe you can get by with as little as a 45-day recovery period because things are recovering quicker. But through most of our year, you just will figure on 3 months, 90-day recovery period. Again, rotate as 1 herd. I know there's situations where, these horses don't like these horses, blah, blah, blah. Well, you may have to turn them out for their 2-hour period of time separately. This one gets 2 hours from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. This one gets 2 hours from 10 o'clock to noon. You know what I mean? I know it sounds crazy, but in order to preserve these pastures, you got to stick to a schedule. Begin grazing in a different pasture each year, because, you have cool and warm season plants out there. So if they're grazed at the same time every year, a lot of the cool season plants can get hit harder than the warm seasons, or vice versa. So we want to increase stock density, not stocking rate. And so that's why putting more animals on a smaller area for a shorter period of time increases stock density, but not stocking rate. You still have to maintain that carrying capacity. You only have so much forage out there, all right? So the carrying capacity comes first, and then the rotation grazing comes after that. More animals on a smaller area for a shorter period of time. You get a more even distribution of grazing. Those animals will graze some of the undesirable with the desirable because they're confined to a smaller area. They don't have the whole area. You take away some of their selectivity, like people at a smorgasbord, right? So if you're limiting that smorgasbord to just one area of it, well, then people have to take more of the broccoli and that sort of thing that's in that section of the smorgasbord. You know what I mean? So this is not a new concept. This is my last slide, by the way. James Anderson, a Scotland farmer, said this in 1777. Animals delight most to feed on fresh plants. Cattle supplied with this kind of food would be quickly fatted if a farmer divided his land into 15 or 20 equal divisions, stopped his beasts from roaming indiscriminately, put the whole number of his beasts into one of these divisions, have the number of beasts so great as to consume the best part of the grass in one day, give then a fresh park each morning, so to repeat the same repast, have so many parks as days required to advance the grass to the proper length. That's the recovery, okay? Advance the grass to the proper length after being eaten fair down, so the first field will be ready to receive them after going over all the others, so they might be carried around in a constant rotation. I know it's funny English, but he's a Scotsman, right? So there you go. It's not a new concept. It's just, and if we were to, at the time, if we would have paid attention to the way the bison were doing it, we could have figured it out, on our continent. But anyway, that's it, folks. Sorry it took so long. If you have any questions.
Keep the mic, because I'm sure there's going to be questions. You're good time-wise. Next time I want to see you do that with a Scottish accent.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, questions
And
for
I've
Dan.
got, on that grazing, that rangeland management guide sheet, my contact information is on there. So, if you have questions later too, you can get a hold of me or whatever. So,
Is there a way to factor feeding hay forage into this?
yeah,
Where you can, is there a mathematical way of doing it? Or?
there is. I mean, if you figure out how much forage you have available in your pasture by doing what we did there, okay? So you got a month out of the year. Well, you know that the other 9 months, and you know your animals, you know how much they eat, right? You know how big they are and all that. You know how much they eat. So you're supplying them with your pasture with 1/12 of their total needs for the year. So that means 11/12 are going to have to come from hay.
So do you feed hay in each pasture as you move them around? Or do you feed the hay?
You can do that, yeah, you can do that. I mean, if you're putting the hay out in the pasture, I guess it's supplying, you're giving inputs to the pasture, essentially. You're supplying it with the extra organic matter out there. So, yeah, I don't see anything wrong with doing that. A lot of people just like to feed in the corral and then turn them out for their 2 hours. But either way, yeah, that's fine. But in that example we gave, you just well figure they're on full feed. Don't even figure the 1/12 that they're getting from the, you know what I mean? I mean, it's just a recreation area in that situation. It's a place where they can recreate. You know, and but you still want to do some type of maybe you wouldn't need to go to the full Ted pasture kind of thing, but you know, you need to have some kind of a recovery where you're not turning those animals out to that same area every day throughout the growing season. The growing season being more important than the dormant period, but in the dormant period, it's important too, particularly with horses. These are athletic animals. They're running around back and forth. They're tearing up root crowns on those plants just by running back and forth. You know, they're not like cattle. Cattle tend to be more lumbering. You know, they don't run back and forth and tear stuff up as much. Yeah.
All right, any other questions for Dan?
Like I said, you can contact me too. My information's on there. So.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, our last presenter is Dustin Pulasic. Dustin grew up in West Texas ranching, and he joined the Marine Corps at the age of 17. Hoorah. After serving 8 years, Dustin was medically retired and journeyed to CSU, where he earned his Bachelor of Science in Forest Management and a Master's in Ecological Restoration. Dustin is currently leading Nutrien's research into UAV applications, and he's going to talk about weed management and use of UAVs. So we'll turn that over and want to welcome Dustin.
Where's the clicker and where's that mic?
There, and there's that. You want the hand mic? Okay, perfect. Perfect.
All right, can everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
All right, thank you for having me out this evening, I guess, at this point. This is actually my last speaking event in this position. As much as we were doing in the research phase, we have actually passed our research phase at this point, and we are moving into a full operational phase. So as of October 1st, I am the chief pilot for the Nutrient Solutions, and I'll be running our entire national program. So kind of a big promotion for me, and I'm pretty excited about it. With that, I really do believe in the UAV technology. We have about 6,000 acres altogether down in West Texas that we're running cattle on. We actually have gotten rid of most of our horses at this point. We actually do about 90% of our operations with UAVs, including moving cattle, spraying, going out and monitoring cattle. We can actually use our thermal cameras at night, and we can actually watch during obviously when they're giving birth, and we can actually see when they're about to give birth. We can actually see a temperature drop on the cow, so we know when they're about to throw their kid. We can actually get out there, make sure everything's going to do what it needs to be done. So UAVs have actually kind of improved our life quite drastically, especially when we're talking about large acreage that we cover and we manage. A little bit about who we are as Nutrient, what we cover. We're pretty much your natural resources experts. Not only are we ag, we do the ag side of the house, but we do spend a lot of time in the natural resources field. We work with your environmental, forestry, aquatics, rangeland, wherever you can, whenever you think natural area, we're there. Roadside applications, we handle all that as well too. A little bit about what we're going to cover today. It's pretty simple. A little bit of background about me so you understand who you're talking, who's up here talking. After we get into that, we'll do a little bit of definitions. We're going to talk about some modern equipment, some of the limitations that we have with modern equipment. We'll get into UAVs, some of the actual benefits of them, some of the limitations of UAVs, because even though they are a new tool to our toolbox, there already are some limitations that we have found with this, just like every other tool in our toolbox out there. Following that, we'll get into a couple UAVs. We're not going to do the flight demo. Obviously, we can't do that at this point because there's no point in taking you all out. We can talk a little bit about what we can do with the UAVs. And my biggest and fun comment right now is it's not a matter of if at this point, it's just a matter of when. I am not the only person in this room right now that is actually looking at doing UAV applications. There are actually, there's a private individual here as well. There are other private entities. This is going to be here next year. This is why I like to give this talk, because this year we were the ones out there doing it. Next year, you are going to see so many of these, it is going to be unreal. You're going to see them on the roadside. You're going to see them out in someone's range. You're going to see them out in someone's ranch. You're going to see them out in the forest. You're going to see them in aquatic environments over lakes. They are going to be everywhere next year. I promise you that. with that, we'll kind of get into some questions at the end. And I've got a really cool video where we actually set up a swarm, and we'll actually let you see what a swarm looks like in operation. A little bit about me, as they said, medically retired from the military, served from 2005 to 2012. During my tenure, I was actually in the infantry for the most part. I got to go over to be a breacher instructor for a little bit, got into some counter intel stuff, and on my last little stint, I was actually working as an explosive ordnance disposal technician. I was a bomb tech, the Hurt Locker guys. Yeah, fun times. Following that, got my bachelor's in forestry at CSU, my master's in restoration ecology. I am a restoration ecologist by definition. I've been working in vegetation management since about 2014. I always say that's a very loose 2014 because I've been working in vegetation management my entire life since I've been raising cattle. Working with cattle, you are in vegetation management at all times. So when I say 2014, that is actually professionally. That means I was making money. People were paying me because I knew what I was doing. Amazing. All right, some definitions we want to talk about. UAV, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about what most of y'all refer to as drones. That is not a true term for them, though. Drone is a slang term for a UAV. A drone is something that can actually have a man put on it. There are drones out there. That means people can actually be flown around from someone on the ground, and they can fly it. That is the definition of a drone. An unmanned aerial vehicle is, by what it means, it is unmanned. It cannot have anybody on it, cannot have personnel on it. It is unmanned. So that is the first thing I like to get out there. We work with nothing but UAVs in our side of the house. We do not work with drones. Unmanned aerial systems. So when we start thinking about UAS, that's when you need to start thinking about swarms. So what I'm talking about with swarms is imagine me putting 4 to 5 UAVs up in the air by myself, and I'm controlling every single one of those from one ground station. It's easy to do, actually, believe it or not, and you'll see it at the end of the video. I talked about drone, those low volume applications. This is kind of the unique aspect of UAVs. When we're working with them, we're normally anywhere from 1 to 5 GPA. And that is an extremely ultra low volume application. It's actually ULVA is what it's known as. It is really unique working in these ultra low volumes because number one, we're obviously water conscious at that point. That is a big issue out here in Western United States, utilization of water. So now we're actually using a lot less water for our applications. A lot of people go, well, how are you effective at those application rates? Well, we're actually extremely effective because what it comes down to, it comes down to your droplet size and it comes down to your adjuvants. So those are the big 2 ticket items that we're working with and we're manipulating whenever we're doing any of our UAV operations. And modern equipment, think modern equipment. ATVs, UTVs, guy out there with a backpack on him, hosing it down. A little bit of history. I like to bring this up because everyone seems to think that UAVs are actually a new thing. In reality, they are old. They are extremely old. First one flew back in about 1782. It was a balloon that they used to actually go do reconnaissance. Following that, you jump over to the 1800s, we see the first time UAVs see combat. We had a French lieutenant go ahead and strap some bombs to some balloons and send them over the freaking barriers and start bombing dudes with them. That is a UAV doing its job. Now we get a little bit earlier. We go to the 1917. This is the first conventional UAV as all of us know it. This thing could actually go up in the air. It could fly itself. It was not very accurate. It was not very stable in the air, but it did the job. The other name for it, besides the Kittering bug there in 1917, is the aerial torpedo. Amazing how we keep talking about military. Let's keep thinking about that as we're going here. Keep thinking about that. I got a big question here, and it does behoove you to answer my questions. I do ask that if you get the question correct, you come see me at the end of class because I have a bad out Spyderco knife to give you. Yeah. All right, now we jump up to the 70s. We got the Predator. That is the Predator that everyone knows. That's the thing that's over in Middle East kicking some butt right now, doing its job. That is the Predator, 1974, 50 years ago. Pretty old. Jump up to where we are now. Obviously, we see the tech phase that we've gone through over in 2014. We saw all the DJI stuff coming out, saw the regulatory side of it coming out in about 2017. And now it moves us to where we are now, where we've got drones actually doing spraying applications for us, fully automated. Current uses of our UAVs today, obviously we got the imagery guys. We got the guys that are going out there. They're wanting to take videos of their Jeeps doing some awesome stuff. But when you start thinking about imagery and rangeland, What, does anyone have any experience with that? Multispectral. If anyone's ever heard of multispectral, this is probably the coolest thing you will ever use in a rangeland environment. What my multispectral imagery drone does for me is it flies over all your properties. It takes 7 photos as it's flying over, and it takes a lot of those photos, numerous times. And it'll build me a map of your property. And off that map, I can go through and I can go look at the nutrition of your plants. I can go look at the species composition of your plants. I can go look and see where your water is running. I can go look and see where you're having water issues. That's just with one drone flight. It can do about 100 acres in an hour. So in an hour, I know 100 acres of your property better than a lot of you even know it. That's all it takes. That's imagery drones for you right there. Military, obviously we've talked about that. I want to bring this up one more time because all of y'all did something today. And as I like to put it, UAVs are the next GPS. How many of y'all use GPS today? Who knows where that technology originates from? The military. We were doing what y'all did with your GPS back in 2005. I could be in Iraq. I could literally see where my units were moving to. I could text my buddy off my Blue Force tracker and tell him I needed him to go over to XYZ. I could literally send him the coordinates off of that. 2005. Bring us to where we are now. Y'all finally have that technology. The UAVs that we're seeing right now in the civilian sector are so scaled down compared to the stuff that we've already worked with. It's unreal. This technology is just now starting to flood into the civilian sector as well as it should. This is the next GPS. This is not, it's not a matter of if at this point, it's just a matter of when now. With that, we've got a lot of applicators. In Colorado alone, we actually have 3 commercial applicators currently. My business actually is one of them. Me and my business partner, Justin, own Rise Drones Services. We're out of the Grand Junction in Colorado Springs area. So we actually do offer applications. There's another company up in the Windsor area, and there is a third company starting down here in this area.
What do you mean application?
We go out and we conduct full-scale applications. I do brush control. I do cheatgrass management. I do weed management. I do seeding operations. I do aquatic applications. Any application you can think that you can do with your tractor or your ATV or your UTV, I can do with my drone. 100%. I've even put it through trees. We literally are flying through forests and underneath canopies with these bad boys. They can work really well for us. Current limitations. Well, we start thinking about the environment that we work in. We start thinking about the ranges that we work in alone. What's a big thing that we come across in our ranges? Waddies. You have big cutouts. You have big erosion waddies. You have all these things that you'll come across. Well, guess what? When I'm riding my ATV, that matters because I don't want to go into one of those and I don't want to end up rolling my ATV. But when I'm flying my drone, oh well, let the thing go buzz over it and it'll track that land perfectly for me. And I don't have to put myself at any risk. So we're out of that risk area. Start thinking about our manpower shortages. If you come to our side of the house where you're actually doing this on a public application aspect, good luck finding workers right now. Try telling a kid to go take a backpack and go hump Mount Sopris with it to look for Canada thistle. It ain't gonna happen. You go get one of these kids though and you show them a drone and you show them what this thing can do and a PlayStation generation comes out of him and he's ready to rock and roll with that bad boy. It's the reality of the situation, guys. We got to start thinking about this. How do we start getting these new generations into natural resources, into agriculture? These are dying industries for us right now, but this is our way to start reinvigorating them, bringing this new blood in. We talked about that risk of injury already. Risk of injury also due to the application area. How many of you are sitting on the side of your road, spraying your ditches, making sure that they're all clean of cheatgrass and other fun stuff? Anyone? Am I the only one on the roadsides right now? I know Curtis is too. So imagine this, you're driving by, you see a drone doing that job. See a UAV doing that job now. Get the roadside applicator off the road. Traditionally, for most of us roadside applicators, we like to start real early in the morning. Normally about 4 or 5 in the morning. You know who also is out 4 or 5 in the morning? Drunks and tired salesmen like me. We're not very reliable on the road. Half the time I'm on a cell phone, guys. Come on, at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm already on the phone. I'm not saying that trying to be proud of it. I'm saying it because it's dangerous to be out on that road. As a roadside applicator, it is dangerous. There's a reason fire trucks have to park certain ways on highways, because they are anticipating the wreck. Something to think about. Risks of the actual applicator. What else? How many times have you been out on a range and all of a sudden the wind shifted on you, and next thing you know, you're covered in blue and you look like a freaking Smurf? I call it getting smurfed out. I've been there. Everyone's been there once in their life. If you've done any spraying, you've all been smurfed out. UAV, I'm nowhere near that application area. The only time I'm at risk of any exposure is actually when I'm doing any mixing. And if you start actually getting with a closed caption system, and you actually work a true closed caption system, you have no exposure risk whatsoever. Oh, and that last line, precision. When we start running RTK, we have centimeter level accuracy. And when I say centimeter, I mean literally 1 to 2 centimeters off. Even with a handgun, I am not that accurate. I try my best, but there's no way in heck I am that accurate with a handgun. So now we're talking about the most precise sort of application you can look at, the easiest form of application, and the safest form of application you could possibly use. Seems like a win-win-win to me. Current limitations, federal regulations. So one of the big issues we have right now is the FAA. What I can do down in South America, and what I was doing about 3 weeks ago down in South America, was flying 20 drones at one point. I cannot legally do that in the United States. I can only fly up to 3 to 5. They will not allow us to do that. There are a lot of restricting factors with the FAA currently that we're still working through. What they are doing in China, we wish we could be doing here right now. That's all there is to it. Because if we could actually use these UAVs to the fullest extent, we could almost all be out of business at this point, to be honest with you. It's kind of sad. Battery capability, limiting factor. That's probably the biggest headache of it all. But at the end of the day, when you actually start thinking about these batteries, I'll run 22 minutes on a battery full charge. Normally it takes my UAV about 5 minutes to complete a full application. So it'll go out with 4 gallons on it right now. That's my medium model that I actually have sitting in my truck with us. So it'll go out, it'll complete its application in about 5 minutes. It'll roll through that, it'll come back, it'll land. I'll swap the battery on and I'll put a new battery on. I'll take that battery, I'll put it on a charger, 3 battery system, and you have continuous work for the day.
How much land do you cover, 4 gallons?
4 gallons, that's 2 acres worth of product, 2 gallon per acre. So with my 18-gallon model, he does that he does about 9 acres, and he'll do that in about 7.5 minutes.
About what?
7.5 minutes. So, pretty productive. Some of the other big issues, one of the other last things that I like to talk about is that public view interest. And this is why I actually like teaching these classes. Because right now, when people start seeing me put these drones up in the range and they start seeing all this stuff, it's kind of crazy how fast, is this not working? All right. It's kind of crazy how fast we end up having a pile of people. My VO traditionally becomes the guy that's actually managing the group that's behind over there. Because on a typical application, we have about 20 to 30 looky-loos stop and just actually want to see what we're doing. Nothing wrong with it. So it's actually a great thing to me, because this is actually kind of changing that public perception. You know, when the UAVs came out, everyone thought they were spying on them. They thought they were an issue. They thought they were just going to be looking through their houses or something like that with some bad out cameras, you know. It's not the case. You know, half of the spray drones that we actually run don't even have a conventional camera on it that can actually penetrate anything good. Yes, ma'am?
So how are you looking at it to see that you're getting the right read?
So remember how I talked to you about that multispectral drone? We'll send that multispectral drone out first, and we'll actually let it go identify everything for us. And it does all the work for us. And then I go, yep, and then I take that and I transfer it straight over to a program on my computer, and I literally build the application 100% off of that. I don't even have to go do ground truthing half the time anymore. I can walk out on scene with the UAVs, pull them out, and just let them start going to rip and ray. Awesome. And one of the lines I like to talk about, new technology. Obviously, as you can see, there are some wrecks. There are some issues that are coming off with the technology as we keep going through it. There are going to be some changes with it. It's obviously new tech, so it's going to happen. One of the big concerns that I have right now is actually vehicles and traffic, because in case anyone didn't see it yet, which I doubt anyone did, but there was definitely a giant UAV put into a truck in China, and it killed a man, unfortunately. So guys not doing what they should be doing, not being trained as well, and that's kind of going to that regulatory side of the house. I talked about regulations earlier and even mentioned on this, the 137 used to be a 2-year process for us to be able to get that license. It is now a 48-hour process. They shortchanged that about 2 months ago, 3 months ago. Completely changed all the regulatory aspect on it. You don't have to do a check ride. You don't have to go sit in front of the FAA, test in front of them or anything. It's a completely different world now. This is why I'm telling y'all are going to see so much of this next year. It is going to be unreal because the big barrier to limitation, the big barrier to entry was that Part 137, and it is not anymore. It is now a 48-hour, go check out online and you got it. So not a good thing because it's going to unfortunately cause a lot of incidents, and we're probably going to see some major wrecks next year, and we're probably going to see a lot of companies start, which is going to be fantastic for me because I'm going to be picking up a lot of cheap used drones. Some of our success, obviously, in the mountains, we've done pretty good. Rangeland, is probably one of my favorites. Today, actually, this morning, we were actually out doing Rejuvera applications. Does anyone know what Rejuvera is for? Cheatgrass. Best stuff in the world. So it just so happens that I worked with Dr. Derek Sebastian for several years, and I got to do all the groundbreaking studies on that, and I was actually out with him in Pierce. I was out with him out in western Colorado when they were throwing all that stuff down for the first times. I've worked with the Rejuvera since it was just a little numbers on a bottle, basically. It's an awesome product. It's fantastic. I love that product. Great in a range environment, and it shoots well out of a UAV. We were literally doing nothing but UAV applications with them today. My UAV that I got in the back of the truck did about 100 acres worth of Rejuvera applications today by itself. And that's one drone right now.
Can you also cover the application rate? Is that what change based on the weed?
I was at 5 gallon per acre on that. So high application rate at that. So that's actually the highest that we're willing to go. 2 gallon per acre is my traditional. Normally at 2 gallon per acre, that drone's doing about 17 to 20 acres an hour.
What else does that kill? Besides just
It's really just a seed inhibitor is really what it actually is. It's a CBI, cellulose biosynthesis inhibitor. So it's actually going to inhibit seed growth for the following year. It's going to inhibit germination specifically. So like when we're going after cheatgrass, one of my favorite things to do is like a July, August application, especially up in the mountains, because we can normally dial in a rain time after that. Cheatgrass in this area typically goes into germination time frame in late August, early September. So by knowing that it's going to go into that germination cycle around that time, if we can get the Rejuvera out in front of that germination cycle from occurring, we can actually get it incorporated into the soil with the rainfall that's occurring. We'll have it set right in time for that germination cycle to start kicking up, and it'll inhibit a lot of that germination from occurring. The beautiful thing about Rejuvera is it picks up a lot of your broadleafs as well too. So like kochia, pigweed even, a lot of them, it'll inhibit the seed on those too. It's not going to inhibit all the seed on those, but it is going to help you. It is going to help a lot at that. If you go look at most roadside applications now, the premier products that they're running is aminocyclopyrachlor, Method 240SL, and then Esplanade 200SC, which is your Rejuvera combo. Esplanade and Rejuvera are the same identical products. Esplanade is labeled for roadsides. Rejuvera is labeled for range and pasture. That is the difference. You want to know the other fun difference? Esplanade, $1,400 a gallon. Rejuvera, $1,067 a gallon. They're taking it to them roadside guys good, aren't they? With that, though, we started talking about those manpower shortages. So we talked about swarming. How many of you can go put a backpack and go take 5 backpacks, put them out in the field and go spray? Just doesn't happen. I can go put 5 drones out in the field and go spray. And they're going to go spray. And they're going to do the job for me. So we started talking about those manpower issues. Well, now not only do I want to get some of these younger guys in, we're going to get them in, but I don't need as many of these younger guys now. I just need the select few that are really going to get into this and really get their heads wrapped into this, understanding the chemistry, understanding that side of the house. Because finding a drone pilot's easy. Finding people who understand the chemistry like everyone in this classroom does is hard. So, kind of something to think about with that. I think we've kind of hit all the big stuff on that, so we'll jump forward. This is our 116. This is my 4-gallon model. This is the baby model, as I like to put it. We have a smaller model, that's a 2-gallon model, and then we jump up from there. The next one's a 12-gallon model, and then the biggest one is our 18-gallon model. They are extremely productive, especially when you start putting 3 of them up in the air at a time. That 1 gallon per acre note down there at the bottom, that's a dream right now for all of us. We are praying for 1 gallon per acre, and we are working on it. That's part of what my research has been focused on. We've actually done quite a few 1 gallon per acre hits that were just as successful as my 2 and 3 gallon per acre hits. Once again, talking about droplet size and adjuvants, that's where those two guys come in to be big players right there. We're not going 100% full forward with 1 gallon per acre hits and telling people that they can do them yet, because once again, number one, start looking at labeling. Most labeling says anywhere from 3 to 5 gallon per acre minimums. So you're going to be breaking labels, obviously. And the second aspect of that is it's kind of crazy when you really start seeing a 1 gallon per acre application. It is not a lot of product going down. It is very minimal, and a lot of people don't believe in it. So when you start telling them that you're going to do 1 gallon per acre hits, a lot of people actually get more scared of the UAVs than they were initially, and they push us further away. So we're kind of sticking to that 2 gallon just until people really start understanding how bad out and awesome these units really are and how much they can really do for us. Once we get a little bit more of that out there, we get a little bit more research into these 1 gallon hits, we are going to be moving down to the 1 gallon per acre stuff. We are going to be kind of focusing most of our stuff around there. Probably brush control will still be up at that 5 gallon, and we do bare ground at 5 gallon per acre too. So, but 1 gallon per acre is the dream, and when we get there, the productivity level is just going to be unreal.
Is wind a real issue?
No, because of prop wash. So if you actually watch as the UAVs are flying, we're 8 to 10 feet off the ground, or 8 to 10 feet off of vegetation. We're very close to the ground in comparison to conventional aircraft. With that, you will actually notice from the actual props, they push all the droplets down really good, and they actually get it down in there. The other cool thing was like working with corn. We actually noticed like corn earworm specifically, we actually got a lot better of a hit than our helicopter pilots and our aircraft pilots did. And we think a lot of that actually came from that downforce aspect, because when you watch the corn, that stuff is literally whipping when it's getting pushed down there. And if you watch the droplets, they're moving in like almost a circular convection, and it brought them up into that corn earworm where it actually was sitting. So it actually had some really good effect. You got to western Colorado right now, we had 7,000 acres that we ran over there ourselves. We've got spreaders on them. I can do seeding. I can do fertilization. I can throw granular herbicides into aquatics. Productivity on that's going to drop a little bit on the seeding. I don't really talk about the productivity on that because that really comes down to the size of the material you're throwing at that point on how your productivity is going to be. So that's kind of a variable on the spreader on that one for productivity levels. Swath on this is variable, 7 to 25 foot. So that's another cool thing about it is if we want to adjust a swap, say we're getting a specialty, we're wanting to go hit like just one line for some reason, we're wanting to go take care of your fence lines, we can actually set it up to where it'll literally just go burn your fence line for you. So thinking about got some woodies coming up on your fence line out in the range, you need to get rid of them, that's the guy to go take care of them for you. like I said, 25 to 30 minutes unladen flight time, 15 to 20. I'd say you're right at 22. The one thing about this that I like to bring up is this is an American-made drone. That does not mean all the parts are made in America. That means the programming is in America. That is the only difference between this and the other next drone I'm about to show you. The big difference between them is the price tag. This is a $40,000 unit, unfortunately, because of that American-made tag on it. And the next one is a $20,000 unit, but it is Chinese. So nothing wrong with DJI. I actually love DJI. They were the first really into the drone side of the house, especially coming into the civilian market. They're probably the prominent player right now. Definitely has a great production capability. This is an older model. The T20 no longer even exists on their production line. They've moved to a T30 and a T40. The T30 is just, when they're with their numbers, all that's talking about is how many liters it can hold, basically. So the T30 is a step up, T40 is a step up from that. Once again, for our AG-116, it holds 16 liters. If you move up the numbers on it, it's just once again talking about how many liters it can hold. The T30 is an awesome unit. It's probably one of my favorite units to fly if I'm not flying on U.S. government property. If I'm flying on U.S. government property, I only fly Helio. And that's because they actually have regulations involved that actually restrict us from flying DJI on their property. The cool thing about the DJI that I really, really love is how fast they are on scene. They're really quick to get set up. They're really easy to get set up. And as far as like an entry-level unit, they're probably the easiest unit to fly.
They really are. They're just very simple to fly, very self-explained. The remote will really walk you through a majority of the issues that you could possibly have. The Helio units, on the other hand, they take a little bit more skill to fly. You have to spend a little bit more time understanding them because you're actually using a true GCS. You're using a ground control station, so you're using your laptop to fly. You can use a controller, but you are primarily using your laptop with those, which is a unique aspect because with my DJI, I can't do a lot of that planning, that forethought planning that me and you were talking about earlier. With my Helios, I can very easily. So it's a fantastic aspect with them too. I think that's really it for the DJI. What can we do? Well, we talked about kind of those calibrations down there at the bottom. We can do blanket applications, which is what you're seeing kind of up in that top left corner. We can do spline or linear applications. So if we need to go run like a ditch, if we need to go run some ditch sides or something like that, we can actually set that up to literally just go burn straight up your ditch side. If we want to run 10 foot off your ditch, we can set it up to where it'll burn a 10-foot swath right off your ditch perfectly for you. The other one is the spot applications. So that's what that bottom left corner is. So we found patches of Canada thistle out in our range that we want to take care of. When we went out with our multispectral drone, it showed us where all that Canada thistle was. I'll go on that map, and it'll literally have all those Canada thistle lit up for me. And it'll be bright and blue and sunny for me, and I'll literally just go start dropping spots on it. That spot is about an 8-foot spot that drone will shoot for you. So it's going to cover about an 8-foot little circle. It's going to literally go sit over that spot, and it's just going to rotate slowly over it for you. And it's just going to cover that whole little 8-foot bubble and kill all that Canada thistle under there for you.
What's the highest altitude you go to?
That's a great question, and one I don't have an answer to, because at the end of the day, if you're doing something like that, you're playing with it. You're not using it for its intended purpose.
Well, I'm thinking more of doing this on the side of Mount Evans where they're having a terrible Canadian thistle problem and they're doing it manually.
I was already up in Aspen spraying with it all the time. It's already been up on Mount Ebert up there actually a few times, and it's already taken care of all sorts of stuff, even at 10,000 feet. The only thing that happens then, what's that?
I'll get your card and pass it over.
Yes, ma'am. And
We're taking horses out of green water.
I remember those. I've done those out. We actually had a mule guy over in Aspen. He used to run mules, and I used to go up with him all the time. So I've done mules up in Aspen. I've done that whole fun stuff. I refuse to do them ever again. I'll just bring a drone from here on out, to be blunt and honest. I mean, it is so much simpler. And we've flown all over Aspen. There isn't a single spot up there I have not touched. I've been...
Mount Evans is, we're talking Mount Evans,
Yeah.
or whatever they're calling it starting tomorrow.
Yeah. But we've had it all the way up to 12,000 so far. The only difference that we saw at 12,000 feet was a little bit of battery life, and that's due to the power loss because of the air actually up there. The air's a little bit thinner, so it has to actually increase its power up a little bit. It has to ramp up, so we lost about a minute of flight time or so on it. Yep. Not a big thing. Then that last point on here is that key to success, water quality adjuvants. A lot of people don't check their water before they actually start spraying. Water quality is a huge, huge deal. I actually teach a 2.5-hour-long class on nothing but water quality before spraying. Probably one of the biggest and most overlooked aspects. Something I like to say is you're worried about that 1% that you put into your tank, that chemistry, but you forget about the other 99%. And that 99% does matter.
What aspect of water quality?
Your turbidity, so any sort of sediments or anything like that, that's going to have organic molecules for your chemistry to lock into. pH is off. It can actually have pH hydrolysis. Your pH can throw all your chemistry off. And then hardness, your water hardness itself.
So is it practical to use distilled water? Or?
No, you can use just water agents. So we have like a nutrient ourselves. We actually offer a lot of water conditioning agents, and we have adjuvants that are actually combined with water conditioning agents too. So I would honestly personally do that. I wouldn't be spending the money on distilled water. I would be staying as cheap as I could. The water quality conditioners will cost you 70 cents to 100 gallons. So at the end of the day, it's really not that expensive, and it's worth doing. If you want some more water quality info, I'm happy to actually talk about that for several hours. I love water quality. It's one of my favorite classes. I'm sorry, I'm running a little over right now. But it's definitely a great class. I have some business cards, so I'm happy to hand them out, and we can talk water quality all day. I'll come test your sites. I have my own water testing kits, the whole 9 yards, that will actually come out, and we'll test your sites. We are guys that go out on site with y'all. So the guy who will be replacing me, we are field techs. We do not sit in an office. We go out on site with all of y'all. We do sell chemical. That is our primary job. But our other secondary aspect is to be out there helping y'all, training, teaching, educating, identifying, whatever it may be that we need to do. We are that field expert for you. And this is the cool stuff, and this will be where I end. Do we have audio? Can anyone guess where that was filmed? This is the question. This is how you get a knife tonight. Looks like Texas. You're wrong on that one, unfortunately. I wish I was back home, but I was not on that one. Wyoming, you're getting a little closer, actually. We are going up north. You are correct on that. Maybe start heading to the west a little. Yeah, a little bit further west. Keep going west. As far west as, there you go. Come see me at the end of class today, Marco. I'll get your info and we'll get you a knife, brother. That was out in Washington State, actually. So we were up in Washington. It's funny that you brought up the Mount job. We are actually the ones that are taking care of all the restoration work on Mount St. Helens right now. And we are doing it with UAVs. All right, questions?
Size of one of those that we were just looking at.
That one will be about the size of, he'd probably eat up the back of a truck a little bit, but a lot of it is break apart and a lot of it's foldable. So once you fold that guy down and actually get him all the way down, he'll fit into the back seat.
What were you spraying for?
We were actually doing a water drop on that one. It was just a demonstration for people. So we didn't even do any conditioners or we didn't even do any adjuvants on that one. I have some live spray demos and videos that we don't really put out 100%. We're starting to build it up and we're starting to get some stuff kind of on it. A lot of that stuff we're keeping a little bit close to chest right now, just until we finally finish up this manual that I've been writing for the last year or so, and we're gonna kind of get that guy launched, and that'll be kind of our launch out to start getting everyone out and interested a little bit more into it as well. We've done Toradon, we've done Duracore, aminopyralids, milestones, all that fun stuff. Duracore is the new milestone. Has everyone heard of that one? High Noon, that's the other one that's came out. Corteva's gonna really want me to make sure I talk about those too while I'm here. But they're the new aminopyralids. They do a great job. So if you got some thistle issues, don't be afraid of grabbing some Duracore High Noon, running those. We ran those through drones. We ran a lot of aquatics. That's been quite a big seller. I didn't think that we would be in the aquatics market as heavily as we are, but it is definitely getting heavier and heavier. We take care of 5 major lakes throughout Kansas. So it's a pretty big market for us right now, and it's starting to become bigger and bigger. We had 6 other lakes come approach us literally this last month alone about coming and taking care of them. So it seems like the aquatics market is really picking up with it as well. The cool thing on it is the Pelican just got its final approval through the FAA. So that's a fixed wing UAV that can do 100 acres an hour by itself. So it's a beast. And he's going to kind of be the row crop guy of the year, as we put it. That's going to probably find a really good home in those row crops, and that'll be kind of where it ends up finding its home. The rotor winged are kind of finding a home in the range environment and the specialty markets, going in aquatic, riparian areas, stuff like that. That's really kind of being their home right now. I work public, private, the whole 9 yards. So we've done stuff on BLM, USFS. We've worked with the National Park Service on some applications as well too. I've worked with the CSFS as well too on a couple applications too.
What's the cost?
Depends on the model. The T30 is going to cost you 22 grand altogether, and that'll be all the batteries you need, all the.
Oh, you sell the equipment?
No, I don't sell the equipment. I can hook you up with the guy who does.
No, what's it cost to us to use your service?
I'll talk about that offline, if you're all right with that, just because I do have a competitor technically in here, and I don't really want to be just voicing everything. So that's I'll talk to you about that offline. Happy to. It is If I were to compare it to conventional equipment, though, I would say we are beyond affordable. And if that gives you a good indication. No. Any other questions? Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Let's thank all the presenters tonight. I think all the topics were excellent. And I also want to thank my team for this, putting this all together. Paula, Curtis, Nick, and Steve put a lot of work into this. So. And of course, thanks to the board for helping us, guiding us through the year and making sure that we come up with topics that are relevant for everybody. So, go ahead.
On that note, too, if there's anybody in here, especially property owners, that might be interested in being on the board, go to the county website and apply to be on the board, or talk to one of these guys there. That we'd love to have your ideas.
Yeah, that was great, Lee. Want to thank all of you for attending, and on the way out, grab an extra lunch so we don't have to haul them off, okay? Thanks again. Have a great evening. Drive safe.